Welcome to Intersect, a podcast where we find connection in each other's story. My name is Jim Moon. I'm joined today by my co-host, Mrs. Ingrid Moon, and our dear friend, Donna Daisy Pratt. We know her as Daisy, or I sometimes affectionately like to call her Miss Daisy. Daisy and Ingrid, I think you guys were first to meet, and then I met Daisy by extension of Miss Ingrid. So fill us in a little bit about how you guys got connected, and then we want to dig a little bit into a specific texture of Daisy's story today.
I think I can start this. I saw in the bulletin that there was going to be a women's tea, and I said, I think I'd like to go to that. And being new to the area, I didn't go with anybody, and so I just showed up, and I was looking for somebody that was by themselves so I could go sit beside them. And that's when I spotted Daisy, and I went over to her table and I said, "Can I sit here?" And she said, "Well, I'd love you to, but those girls just went to the bathroom and they'll be back." And I said, "Well, I'll just sit here till they come back." And so Daisy and I got in discussion, and it wasn't very long into the discussion that Daisy said, "Ingrid, you're just like a frog. Every time a fly goes by, you try to snap and take that." And why was that, Daisy? Why did you say that?
Well, she was overwhelmed, exhausted, and tense, and yet she was cheerful and charming and gracious to those around her. I knew she was our new pastor's wife because I had seen them introduce her. And my mother was a pastor's wife, and I knew how difficult that was. And because I'm an elder woman, people will talk to old ladies. We're non-threatening. They'll open up. And that's kind of what happened, I think. She started telling me and about all the committees and clubs and speeches and organizations that were all wanting her and telling her she needs to do this and she needs to do that. And she was so overwhelmed. She said, "I just want to do it all. I really want to do what I'm supposed to do, but I know I can't do it all. And I don't know how to pick or choose." And I just looked at her in her distress, and I said exactly what she said. And then it just came out of my mouth, and I almost apologized. I said, "I'm so sorry, but that's exactly what my Scotch Cherokee grandfather always said." He said, "You don't have to swallow everything that flies past your face." And it was his saying. And it was an ancient old wisdom, and it was what she needed to hear.
Totally.
And that's a good segue, Scotch Cherokee grandfather. You talked about a little bit of oral tradition that was passed on through your family heritage, a connection to the Cherokee people. And that, in a way, in your own life, brought a sense of focus for a special season. Tell us a little bit about the backstory that led you to a sense of calling around a theatrical production, more than just a theatrical production, more of an artistic work to capture an important narrative that we shouldn't forget. What kind of laid the groundwork for that from your heritage?
I didn't know about the Brainerd Mission, which is what you wanted me to focus on. I didn't know that story. I knew from my own oral traditions in my family that my grandfather's people fled the roundup of the Removal Act and fled first into North Georgia and then over into North Alabama on the banks of the Coosa River in Etowah County, where I was born. I was born in Gadsden, near Turkeytown. And my grandfather walked red, is the correct expression for someone that completely embraces his Native American culture. He walked red every day in every way. He was a full practitioner of walking the red road. His mother was Amanda Miranda Rakestraw, and her mother was Melissa Raines, and that was pure Cherokee. We are undocumented, so I don't claim to be Indian. I've got French blood. I've got German blood. I don't say I'm German. I don't say I'm French. I have a lot of British, and I don't say I'm a Brit. But more than anything, I want to honor those people that, like my grandfather, that did walk the red road. They did stay true to all of the traditions, and they paid the price of prejudice, extreme prejudice, and hostility, and sometimes even abuse. Although my grandfather, whose name was Royal Guy Finley, he was very respected. He was called the Indian in the city of Gadsden, and even the mayor spoke to him respectfully because he was a man of great dignity and honor and truth and wisdom, and he was known as that person. And when I came up to Lee, he rode up here to come to the campus for me to start an academy. He wanted to come. And he told me something I didn't know when we started around the mountain, the base of Lookout Mountain. He said, "Girl, we came from here." And I said, "What, Papa?" And he said, "This was our home." And that's the first time I had learned that. And the Cherokee antecedents of my family were from this part of Tennessee.
That's fascinating. Now, you mentioned this idea of the red road, that he stayed true to the ways of his people and his heritage. Is that kind of the correct understanding of what it means to walk the red road?
Okay, to walk the red road means to adhere to the Native American sensibilities and perceptions. They're Eastern, they're not Western.
Okay.
They're not European colonists. Their perceptions of the world and the Creator God and everything, time, space, everything is completely different. It's incomprehensible to a contemporary materialistic European-based person. It's just totally non-analogous. It really is.
And so you have this walking of the red road. Then there's this tension or just injustice of the Removal Act. That was like, what, was it 1829 when Andrew Jackson became president?
It was,
and then...
Yeah, and then, but the removal itself was 1830 and 1839 or that.
Okay, so 1830 and
38 and 39.
1838. So it was about
times.
Okay, so about 10 years later. And your grandfather saying, "We came from this area by Lookout Mountain." This is and something about that for you was significant.
I didn't know it was my home. And I mean, I thought Gadsden was my home. I was really raised out west. My father's minister, and his ministry was in Texas and California. But I understood the banks of the Coosa to be my home, you know. And I was 15 or 16 years old when we came up to the academy. That was high school, a junior high. Okay. Lee had an academy at the time. And that's the first I knew that my home was East Tennessee.
Oh, wow. So it's like you're returning to your roots.
And I am home here. I knew that as a student, and even when I came back in college at Lee. And then after all the years of living and working abroad and here, and it was, my parents were gone, and I could live and go anywhere I wanted to. I wanted to come back here.
So this is kind of the place that your people return to, that you return to. And there's something significant about having somewhere that we return to.
Yeah, I'm home. I'm home here. These are my mountains. I'm Appalachian.
Any other pieces of your backstory that you feel like are significant in terms of laying the groundwork for this story that you felt like you were called to tell?
Well, Papa had 6 grandchildren, and I was the only one that was interested in the Native American. And I followed him everywhere, asking him questions. But I was special to him. And even though I really looked like my European antecedents, I had cotton white hair and freckles and really pink skin. He told everyone I was the only grandchild that had the blood, he called it. And he felt like I had the blood. That's all he'd say. And he called me Miss Molly. He gave me a Native American name. And he took me to the woods. And I was the only grandchildren. And he taught me things in the woods. He taught me how to walk. He taught me how to listen to the birds. He taught me the songs of the leaves and the grass. I know this sounds really, really odd, but it doesn't if you are in here in the red road way of seeing and hearing. And these things, when I wrote the script, and I felt too unworthy to write this script, the story of the Brainerd Mission, and I was so overwhelmed by it. All I had to do was think about what my grandfather would say. Or how he would describe it. And I had all the material I needed just came from my heart and my head, and I was able to write it. And when I wrote the speeches for the Native Americans that were presented as chiefs, and they made speeches, and so many people in the area here had said, "You're going to have Cherokee, aren't you? I've never heard Cherokee. I'd love to hear Cherokee." They wanted to hear the language because this was an original language for this area, and people had never heard it. So I determined to have a lot of Cherokee. And I had these speeches written, and it was arranged for the Snowbird Cherokees, their linguists, to translate it. They graciously, they began to believe in what I was doing, and they graciously translated my speeches, and they didn't alter the structure at all. They didn't come back and say, a Native American wouldn't say this. A Native American. It was amazing to me, and I knew that it was my grandfather that had shared enough of the culture with me that I could connect.
So those walks in the woods found words.
It was absolutely the beginning of all of it.
And you're an artist, and it feels like in some ways that your grandfather's moments of mentoring maybe also shaped your capacity to notice, to see, to hear, to...
Westerners think about doing and making. And when they try to understand non-Western thought, they try to replace do with be. And that's as far as they can go. In other words, you're not what you do, you're what you are. Just be. But be is a short step. The long step is becoming. Be itself, if like I said to Ingrid, you're not what you do. You're not your talent. You're not your job. You're not your role. You just are. All you have to do is just be. That's as far as the white, and I don't say that word unkindly, but the Northern European, Caucasian philosophies, that's as far as it can stretch. But the step past that is becoming, because be itself is a stasis. If I am just be, it's frozen in time and space. Be it alive is becoming. And these are things you can't even verbalize. I don't even know how to tell you, because he taught me with leaves and trees.
So as the wind stirs, as the dirt puts forth scent, as the various components of nature are dynamic,
That's a very good way of saying this.
then it's there's a difference between dynamic and doing, and there's kind of a difference between dynamic and just be. It's this becoming, this kind of.
Many years ago in classic literature, if someone in the 19th century, and even in the early 20th century, and I was there, if they wanted to say something really lovely
Mm-hmm.
about someone, they would say, they're so very becoming.
Hmm. 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 That's fascinating. So, in your becoming, there was this work that you couldn't shake.
Well, I didn't know about the Brainerd Mission.
Mm-hmm.
I returned. My parents passed, and I returned to Alabama for their final years to help. And then when they were gone, I was free, and I wanted to come back to East Tennessee. And I came back in 2006, and I discovered Audubon Acres by accident. And I walked in the welcome cabin of Audubon Acres. And of course, you know how it is. If you've been out there, it's a wonderful place. If you haven't, please go explore it. And it is a Trail of Tears site. But on the wall, I saw a display about the Brainerd Mission, which I had never heard of. And when I graduated, I had a minor in American history. Mm-hmm. And I had never heard of the Brainerd Mission. And had gone shopping at Eastgate as a Lee student with that old cemetery there and was unaware of it. And I began to read about it, and all of a sudden I saw where the missionaries of the Brainerd Mission here in East Tennessee, here in Chattanooga, and the old Chickamauga Cherokee village, when the Trail of Tears was enforced and they forced the roundup, two of the Brainerd missionaries and several of the other different missionaries in the area from different missions packed up. Now, these are the Caucasian European missionaries. They were so horrified at the injustice to their Cherokee friends that they packed up their children, their wives, and put them on a wagon, and they went on the Trail of Tears with these Native American suffering cruelly. I'm speechless even now, even more so after reading hundreds of pages of archives and letters and research of what actually the Trail of Tears meant. But I couldn't believe that these missionaries, European missionaries, went in solidarity all the way on the trail. And no one knows this. No one has ever heard this. It's not in any of the books unless you really dig. It's not known. This is the greatest Christian love story. It must be in the whole United States of America. They suffered all the deprivation, all of the cruelty, all of the hunger, the pain, the sickness, and everything of the trail. And when a Native American, a Cherokee, would die on the trail, that missionary would stop and oversee the burial and pray over them. And they tended the sick. And then when they got out there in Oklahoma, they helped them build their schools and their first homes and clinics and stayed out there with them. And I read this, and I have never, that is the most beautiful missionary story I've ever read in my life. It happened right here, and nobody knows it. And I said, I have to do something with this story. Somehow I have to tell this story.
I just find myself saying, how becoming, in the sense that it reminds me of John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Greek language there is tabernacled. He pitched his tent. And so in the trail, or in following in the footsteps of this Jesus, this Yesu that they were seeking to help their native brothers and sisters conceptualize or understand, they didn't just speak the message, they became the message.
Sam Worcester, one of the missionaries here at Brainerd, he helped them set up the printing press in New Echota. He paid for it. They didn't even know how to do this. Toward the end, while they were trying to hold on to what little they had left in North Georgia, and they set up the Cherokee Phoenix, their first newspaper, and Sam helped them. Mm-hmm. And the officials of Georgia came against him, and they arrested him, and they beat him. And they chained him to his horse and drug him 80-something miles before they threw him in jail. And the whole case went to the Supreme Court of the injustice of it. And Dr. Worcester won. But Andrew Jackson was the president. They went to him and they said, Dr. Worcester has won the case at the Supreme Court. And Andrew Jackson said, well, then let the Supreme Court defend their decision.
Sobering that democracy depends upon integrity to follow through from the various individuals that hold office and in the various branches of government.
I love America, and I'm privileged to be an American, and I'm blessed and grateful, and I understand its great beauty and liberty for those that have rights, that are born with full rights. But I am clear-eyed also that it is a work in progress and process, and it hasn't got everything right. And it's not going to. It's done some great things, but it has also been a work in progress.
And you hear this phrase sometimes, speaking truth to power. And yet for Worcester and for those that walk the trail, it's almost living truth to power. I think when we think about the civil rights movement, it was more than just, the words were important. Nobody will forget, I have a dream. And yet there was this texture of, what was being communicated was a living truth to power. It was, our ways will differentiate the way that we're calling, this patriotic engagement. Like sometimes we contemporaneously, sometimes we think the patriot is the one that defends the country, that's willing to lay down its life for the country, that espouses how wonderful the country is. And yet, I think if you look at Worcester, or if you look at King, or you look at others who have kind of lived a truth and lived out a way that they're inviting us to, it's really calling America to the ideals that are expressed in our founding papers and documents and narratives. And there's always been this tension between the ideal of what we espouse and the messy real of some of the injustices that we have committed. So you're drawn to this story, inspired by the courage of these natives. Tell a little bit about the experience of trying to recapture that and bring it forward in artistic expression. How did that impact you? How did it impact the people that were involved with it as it came to life? What is significant about that creative endeavor?
Well, as I began to ask questions about why it wasn't known, at least in this area, everyone said that actually Chattanooga had been wanting to have the story told in some form since maybe the 30s or 40s. And several times the project had been picked up, and it was generally by like a governor or mayor or somebody that was in office and really wanted to develop it. But then as their term ended, they lost that,
Zeal.
position.
Right.
And no one could see because it was not just a red and white story. It was a red and white and black story. And that really complicated because the Brainerd missionaries felt like that color was of no issue.
Right.
They truly had an egalitarian feeling. So the Brainerd Mission School was open to anyone. And it had, when it opened in 1817, it had an equal demographic of black students, freedmen and slaves, Native Americans, mostly Cherokee, but it had some Choctaw and a few, and then, of course, white, the missionaries' kids, and when it closed about 20 years later, it had that same demographic. And it was actually the first fully integrated organization in this part of the country. And what was extraordinary about it was...
So this was like a century or more before
That's right.
the whole integration
right.
movement of the 1950s and 60s.
That's right. That's right. And it was named after a young missionary that never came to East Tennessee. He died when he was about 28 or 29 years old. And he about 70 or 80 years before the Brainerd Mission. And Brainerd name is splashed all over everywhere, streets, buildings, everything. And the average person here in Hamilton County didn't even know who he was. And but they named it after this young man, David Brainerd, because he was a heroic, compassionate, egalitarian young missionary that literally died of a tuberculosis that he contracted, riding in the snow hundreds of miles, tending to the needs of the Lenape Indians in New England. And he died in Jonathan Edwards' house. And everyone knows Jonathan Edwards, a rather crusty dude. We all know him. And but his daughter fell in love with Jonathan Edwards, and he took him in.
You mean fell in love with Brainerd? Is that, yeah, Edward's daughter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jerusha.
Yeah.
And so she prevailed upon her father when David got sick. And so he actually died in Edward's house.
Yeah.
And after he passed away, Edwards found his journal, the now famous classic, the Diary of David Brainerd. And Jonathan Edwards, theology and everybody knows this guy, right? I mean, he's like heavy colonial.
Fire and brimstone.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. The spider dangling over hell, that famous sermon. When he read that, he was, in a sense, completely theologically converted. He wept. He translated fully. I mean, he edited fully and had it published after David died, and it became so important for the next 50 years. There's only 2 books that went in the backpack of every missionary that went to China, India, any part of the world. They had the Bible and they had the journal of David Brainerd.
And then you come to the 20th century and you have this famous story of Jim Elliot,
That's
who went to South America, was killed by a cannibalistic tribe. Elliot's wife and the 4 other wives of the other men that were killed, they go back and lead the whole tribe to Christ. Elliot was heavily influenced by the writings of David Brainerd.
I mean, he left. David Brainerd didn't go to get people saved. He didn't go to force feed religion. He really didn't. And neither did, and the reason the Brainerd missionaries prayerfully decided to name it after him is because they said, we want to love these people where they are. This terrible thing is happening to their world and culture, and we want to teach them life skills so they can make this transition and they can survive. And they will come to know, they will see who Jesus is if we do our part right. We don't have to do a conversion thing on them.
You know, I've been thinking a lot, and this started maybe a year or 2 ago. Maybe it was the beginning of this year. There's a verse in Matthew chapter 10, verse 40, whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. And then in verse 42, and anyone who gives a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple will by no means lose their reward. And it's got me to thinking about this whole thing, that what if there is a, you know, this term evangelism is thrown around. It really means a sharing of the news. And we tend to attach it to proclamation. And so we think of missions as spreading the news, proclaiming. But then if you think about this idea of how becoming, and you think about this idea of what if, as you're referring to Brainerd and referring to those that a generation, several generations, 100 years later at the Brainerd Mission, what if there's also like this evangelism or this ministry of presence, a ministry that is a ministry of hospitality? And what if in being hospitable and becoming, so to speak, what if in simply being, as Jesus said, you are salt that mingles and seasons, what if those realities potentially have salvific impact, that even if those that we mingle among and welcome in and seek to enter into their experience, like what if just that ministry of presence in some cases creates this dynamic where he says, whoever welcomes you as you are in their midst is welcoming me? What if that is a saving exchange, that there will be natives that walk the trail of tears with those missionaries, that it was just the texture of their relationship that Jesus was in the midst of? I don't know.
I don't, and I think it's because I have the 2 cultures somehow inside of me, but I don't hear things the same way as like most people, and I don't process things. And when I was a little girl, and I was taught, you need to witness about Jesus Christ, and you need to lead them to Jesus, and that's your job, and knock on doors and all this. It never connected with me in my mind like I know that these well-meaning people wanted to. Because to me, when I hear witness, it means that's the person that saw it and felt it. It's not what they're telling, it's what they are. I mean, the apostles saw Christ. They didn't go around saying, I saw Christ and I'm telling you, and they didn't. In our court system, you have to be to be a witness, you had to be there. Otherwise, it's word of mouth and it's not accepted.
So to truly be a witness
You
means
have to experience this.
you have to have
not
been
hear about it.
in the presence of Jesus.
That's right. Jesus.
And then the presence of Jesus, Paul says that the mystery of the gospel is Christ in you, the hope of glory. So a true witness has been in the presence of Jesus, and then they are consumed with the presence of Jesus. And then when they're in the midst of another and that person welcomes the witness, they are welcoming Jesus.
That's right. The courts would call most of the way we evangelize hearsay, and we wonder why it doesn't work. Because the average person, even the most blasé non-believer, rejects hearsay. And you start telling people about Jesus Christ and living a Christian life, and you're doing it from hearsay. They look at your life, and there is nothing remotely reflecting what you're trying to impress on them to become. And it's hearsay, and they don't buy it.
And if we're asking others to become, we must be becoming.
And that's what this very wise old Cherokee chief said up in North Carolina. Someone gave him a copy of the Bible, and it was Chief Luska. And they gave him a copy, and of course they'd learned to read, and they're very erudite. And he read the whole thing through, and he handed it back. I believe it was Chief Luska who said it, but he handed it back, and he said, "This is a wonderful book. I am amazed that the white man does not use it and correspond his life to it. It's full of such wisdom." The disconnect. And that's what the Brainerd missionaries, that's what made them different. And that's why how David Brainerd was different. And fast forward 100 years later, when we were taken over all the way up to the 1950s and 60s, these missionaries and these mission schools up in Canada out west were seizing children and trying to turn them white and abusing them. And they're finding their bodies now by the tens of thousands, their little unmarked grave. The absolute antithesis of what the Brainerd Mission did. Because when the Cherokees asked for the Brainerd Mission, they asked for this to be built. It was right outside my hometown in Gadsden, in Turkey Town, right down the road. The Brainerd Mission was discussed and planned, and the meeting was drawn up. Andrew Jackson was there. They called him. And Chief Little Turkey and Sequoia and Cyrus Kingsbury from the American Missions Board. And the Cherokee said, "We want a school and we want our kids to learn, but we want them to be loved and happy and free."
No, okay.
And this is extraordinary. I mean, when people think the way the Brainerd Mission, those kids could leave any time. Their Chief Pathkiller, could walk in at any time to see, as he said, if they're happy and well fed and are loved. He could walk in the door unannounced. The kids could go home. The doors were not locked.
They were free to come and go.
It was just a house of love.
Yeah, it reminds you of Deuteronomy. Teach these things to your children when they, sit down and rise up when they're going in and coming out. There was this freedom to just experience and be in the presence of.
So then I'll encapsulate it. So I had the passion for this thing, and I ended up working. Both mayors, the Hamilton County mayor and the city mayor, they signed off on it. The DAR and SAR got involved, and historians, Tennessee Historians of Trail of Tears people, then the Eastern Band Cherokees and the Cherokee Nation representatives. It was not easy. They really vetted me. My stuff had to be, but I took almost 7 years, 5 years of intensive research, and almost 7 altogether to put it together so it was absolutely 100%. And when we opened at Brainerd High on the 200th bicentennial, 3 of Nancy Ward's great great-granddaughters sitting on the front row. Nancy Ward, Nanya He, the beloved woman of the Cherokees, they were sitting on the front row.
Beautiful. And just to be clear, you referenced the Brainerd Mission in Gadsden, Texas. So,
What, please? In Gadsden, Alabama.
In Alabama, okay.
No, it was just planned there.
Okay, so it was planned there.
It was planned.
It was instituted here.
In the Chickamauga village, right down on the banks of the Chickamauga, down in the old Eastgate Shopping Center area.
Okay, and
The
I think
cemetery is still there.
I don't know if I caught this detail, but what precipitated them asking for the mission? Did you mention that?
They were desperate for their kids to learn. They were losing big tracts of land. They were being forced out, and they knew that a group of Cherokee had already left and gone on their own, called the Old Settlers.
Okay.
They had given up, and they didn't say, the cruelties and abuse and everything was because they wanted the land. They wanted the good Tennessee land.
So the kind of, there was a whole chain of events then that eventually led up to the Removal Act. So they were experiencing, just injustice and
Unbelievable.
Right.
Unbelievable suffering.
And so the mission was founded at what time then?
About 1817. It was, I think they started talking about it in maybe the meeting with Jackson and Kingsbury and the chiefs down in Turkeytown might have been the year before, or, the American board sponsored it.
Okay. All right. So Jackson was having interplay with this community for years then.
Oh, this is his state, or adopted state.
Okay.
So he always he was a land broker. He always felt like they needed to go. But he was he was an attorney up in Nashville, and he was kind of tried to work with the situation as it was, but he became more and more convinced that they just had to go.
So he kind of traded the carrot in for a stick eventually.
Well, we don't have time to talk about Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, okay. Sure. So let's and there's so much more to this story, obviously.
No, it's huge.
But as a wrap, there was a significant title when the whole story is captured creatively, artistically, dramatically. There's a title that came to you, almost like you were given that title.
The Trail Was a Circle. Okay, so I was really blessed in that I have two dear friends that we were all kids together and did in the 60s and at Lee and did theater together. And it was Jim Burns and Doris Dennison and me. And that was the 60s. Well, they married. He became Dr. Jim Burns of the Voices of Lee and all that for 47 years at Lee. And of course, we're still friends. And so I did the first scene in 2015 to show the city that it could be done. They were just still incredulous it could actually be done. So I wrote the first scene and presented it at a city festival in Eastgate on the back of a flatbed truck, and the Burns came. And Doris said, Jim needs to write music for this. They came and watched it. And I said, oh, but if he only would. And so they came aboard, and he wrote 12 songs, incredible songs. They're magnificent. And, but there really wasn't a good closing to it. And I've always had a happy ending. I believe life is wonderful. This is where I think I'm more red than white. And I never claimed to be. But I think life is a joyous journey, and it's hard and painful and terrifying, and oh my goodness, what a ride. But it's so beautiful, and it's so promising, and especially believers. We know how the story comes. We have the hope and joy, and everything I've ever done my whole life as a creative person, I've had a happy ending. So my friends teased me and they said, how are you going to make a happy ending out of the Trail of Tears, Daisy Pratt? They were teasing him. And I'm like, there's a happy ending there. There's a happy ending there. As I wrestled with the horror of the story and went through depression and great fathers of my country, I read their private documents and I couldn't believe the things they wrote. And I was going through a loss of innocence and idealism that I had nurtured all my life about my own country. And I was actually praying for a happy ending. And I saw, and I say this, in my imagination, I have a very huge imagination. And I saw, it was like, and it was not a vision, religious, supernatural, drugs, all this. No, this is just, I have this creative mind that just creates. I can go to these worlds. In my imagination. And I saw them trudging west on foot, wagons falling and dying. I literally saw it like an old movie, an old silent movie. And I saw them die and I saw them stop and bury them and pray over it all the way west. And all of a sudden I realized that where they buried a Cherokee, it became Cherokee soil. That Cherokee body turned into Cherokee soil. And there were footprints back home. It was a complete circle. And those poor people forced into a strange land out west, totally not, they had footprints back home. And I called up Dr. Burns and I said, you've got to write this. You've got to write this. He said, I will write you this song. I'll find time. Just write me 2 pages. And I wrote 2 pages. And he wrote the great ballad, The Trail is a Circle. And the Cherokee Nation was broken into 3 parts. And it's the Eastern Band up in North Carolina. It's the Cherokee Nation, Oklahoma. And it's the settlers, that Katawa down in Arkansas. And they all have 3 chiefs. And I saw them coming together as a whole Cherokee Nation. And did you know, right in the middle of this, for the first time in 200 years, all 3 chiefs of these 3 broken pieces met at Red Clay and lifted up the 3 flags, and they were made one. And that was my ending. I had the 3 flags on my stage. The 3 chiefs come together, the Kitawa, the Cherokee Nation, and the Eastern Band, and the Trail is a Circle playing. And if you could hear the lyrics, the trail is a circle that leads us home. The trail is a circle that leads us home. And I was so moved at these chiefs that I had to go and approach them and talk to them at Red Clay. And it wasn't too hard with the chief of the Eastern Band because he was kind of, political, user-friendly, regular guy. And so was the Cherokee Nation. But the old Katawa chief, he had never come in East in over 200 years. Never. And he was really forbidding kind of guy. And I had to go up to each of them and say, "Sir, welcome home. You are home." I had to do that to these gentlemen. I'd never knew them and I went up to the Eastern Band chief and he thanked me and he was gracious. And I went up to the Cherokee Nation and he thanked me as gracious. And I said, "I've got to do the Katawa." And he had gone and everybody said, "Oh, he's over there by himself." And he was really just formidable, bear looking guy. And he was standing in the field by himself. He was 80s, 90s, and I walked up to him and he was so formidable. And I thought of my grandfather and I squared my shoulders and I went up to him and I said, "Sir," and he looked at me like, "Who are you?" I meant to approach him, as you could see. It's incomprehensible to him. I said, "Sir, welcome home." And he looked at me and his eyebrows raised and his countenance was so fierce. And I said, "You are home. Welcome home." And he his chest lifted and his head raised, and he said, I am home. I am home. It was the most amazing, beautiful thing. I can't even express it. And that was on my stage. Those three broken pieces came together. The trail was a circle that led home. And the natives, American Cherokees, came up to me and say, how can you say that we're still got the Trail of Tears? And I said, only in your mind. And they said, but we were pushed. I said, only in your mind. Let me ask you a question. Can you go down to a real estate office here in town and buy a piece of Tennessee land? And they said, well, yeah. I said, you're home. You can go buy a piece of Tennessee land and put it in your name. You're home. So it's a happy ending.
Yes, dear listener, we all have one father. And like Daisy's grandfather, who at the age of 16 said to her, this is our home. And like Daisy, who in her early 70s got to say to a chief, welcome home. Our Father is saying to each of us, home's just around the corner. I can't wait to say to you, welcome home. We thank you for joining us at Intersect, where we seek to find connection in each other's story. And may you find God turning your trail into a circle. And may you come to a day when you hear his voice say, welcome home. How becoming of you.